Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Arctic Frontiers 2024. Actions and reactions, Arctic global actions and Arctic reactions. Very last day of this year's Arctic conference. You can't really see behind me, but people are slowly popping in. It was a longer night last night, but we are soon ready for our very first big picture of this very last day, talking about Arctic security and local resilience. And later on, this will be followed by our last big picture session on the future of Arctic and artificial intelligence, so it's a bit harder in this morning. Again, don't forget that we will also recap every big picture, so you can rewatch the summary of every big picture as long as you want on our YouTube channel, so please do that. Until then, enjoy today's conferences, discuss. You can still ask questions also via the app if you're as you are registered, and then Susanna will ask them to the audience. Enjoy today's very last day of Arctic Frontiers 2024 on Arctic security and local resilience, as well as on the future of artificial intelligence in the Arctic. And then see you again next year here in Tromsø. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
I don't usually wear the jacket of the base. I usually wear just the ministerial. My vest is in dry linen for custom fitting repair. Okay. Yeah, I leave right. That's very.
To me, coexistence is about fostering long-term stability and creating an environment where individuals can pursue their passion and work with things that make them happy without having to worry about the future.
Coexistence is curiosity and acceptance for diversity. It's the continuous exercise of openness, of learning, of relearning, and of compromise.
To me, coexistence in the Arctic is a conversation across cultures, borders, vast distances, and between humans and our environment.
All right, less light today. Good morning, everyone. Last day of Arctic Frontiers, early in the morning, 9 a.m. We were a bit worried, because there was a reception last night, but the room is quite full, so thank you very much for joining. I guess it's about the topic of today's very first session, which is about Arctic security, so the big picture, and local resilience, the also big picture, but more from a local perspective. So thank you very much for joining us again. We have this picture, and then a very important one in the afternoon on artificial intelligence. But today, what will be today's topic in the morning?
Yeah, so this morning we're really focusing, of course, on geopolitical shifts, the increasing military presence, and NATO expansion, which of course are all having a big impact on the region. And a heightened military presence, of course, does call for cross-border collaboration at a national, regional, and a local level. So it encompasses so much, particularly civil society as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we heard a lot about it over the last 2-3 days about the importance, of course, of bigger geopolitical debates, but also how local resilience has an influence on geopolitical security discussion as well. So I think there's a lot to learn, and glad you were able to make it.
Okay, well, thank you. So, yes, as Andreas has mentioned, it's also this concept of total preparedness, and also what increased infrastructure in the High North will mean for business opportunities as well, because, of course, there will be a knock-on effect, and also information sharing between communities. What can indigenous communities really offer in terms of their knowledge to help actually the military presence and troops and movements in the area. So there's a lot of knowledge sharing that also could go on. How do you best go about doing this? So that's what we're going to be delving into in this panel. And for the first heat of this panel, I would like to welcome my panelists onto the stage. So please do give a warm welcome to Anna Maria Ornerud, who is the State Secretary for the Ministry of Defence of Norway. Welcome, State Secretary. Great to have you with me. Also, please do welcome Rear Admiral Nathan Moore, Deputy Commander for the Atlantic Area from the US Coast Guard. Welcome, Rear Admiral. Thank you.
Good morning.
Would you like to take a seat? Please also welcome Commander and Dr. Stefan Lundqvist, the Pro-Dean of the Swedish Defence University. Welcome, Commander. Great to have you. Take a seat over here. Oh, actually, maybe here. Thank you. And also Jan Kusela, who's the Director General of the Defence Policy Department of the Ministry of Defence of Finland. Welcome. Want to sit over here? And please also welcome Aslak Holmberg, the President of the Sami Council. Welcome, President. Great to have you with us. Thank you. Right, we can all sit down. Thank you. So first of all, State Secretary, I'd like really you to set the scene. What are we looking at right now? How would you describe the situation in the High North in relation to Russia? I mean, what implications does this have for security and preparedness? And, what are you looking at, horizon scanning ahead?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let me just start with the Norwegian perspective and also the Russian perspective. So, from the Norwegian perspective, stability and predictability in the High North is a key interest. When it comes to Russia, we know that the Arctic region and the High North is crucial to Russian security, especially because a large portion of their nuclear strategic capabilities are located in a large base complex on the Kola Peninsula, right next to the Norwegian border. And it has been said often over the last 2 years that Russia has been weakened as a result of the war in Ukraine. It has suffered great losses, especially to its land forces, and a lot of its forces are still preoccupied fighting in Ukraine. But we must not rest assured that a conventionally weakened Russia is a less dangerous Russia, because a conventionally weakened nuclear power will rely relatively more on its nuclear capabilities. And using and protecting its base complex on the Kola Peninsula is a vital interest for Russia. And if you compare the situation in the High North to the situation overall in Europe, the military situation in the High North is relatively stable, but we are in a period of increased tension between Russia and the West. And the increased tension is felt also in the High North. And increased tension is also increasing the likelihood of unintended escalations and misunderstandings relating, causing unintended escalation. And Norway's relationship with Russia has always been a balancing act. We're a small state located next to a regional power with nuclear capabilities. On the one hand, we're a founding member of NATO. On the other, we're the only country bordering Russia that has never been in armed conflict with Russia. So overall, the Norwegian balancing policy towards Russia has been successful. But it has varied over time with the temperature of the relationship. And as I said, we are now in a period of heightened tensions where relations between Russia and the West are cool. And we predict that that will be the case for the foreseeable future. This might last for a long time. And in that situation, a key to preserving our interests is allied presence in our seas and in the High North. So we prioritize to be present in the High North with our forces and to be there together with our allies, carrying out daily operations and common exercises to signal that we are willing to protect our interests in all of NATO's and Norway's area of responsibility.
Okay, well, thank you very much, State Secretary, for laying that out so clearly. Rear Admiral, tell me how you see the big security threats evolving and what the US Coast Guard's role is in all of this. I mean, how do they function as a provider for Arctic security?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we, from the Coast Guard standpoint, the US Coast Guard standpoint, I think what we see is an increase in human activity, right? And when your responsibility is on the water and for the protection of life and safety at sea and the environment, that increased activity equals risk, more risk, right? So the activity that we're seeing causes more risk that we then are responsible for responding to and actually doing our job. So from our standpoint, the Coast Guard, as part of the United States general effort, overall effort to increase safety, prosperity, and stability, the peaceful nature of the Arctic, we want to make sure that continues. I mean, that is really our primary mission. And the way that we're going to do that is presence. I mean, as was stated, I think presence is the key, and the Coast Guard has a long history of operating in the Arctic. We've been in the Arctic for over 150 years, back on the Alaska side, when the United States first purchased Alaska from Russia, and so we have a history of being up there, and that will certainly continue in the future. What we're most keen to is the recent advent of more great power competition that is expanding around the world into the Arctic, as we all know. So presence from the United States standpoint means being in the Arctic, having ships, aircraft, and people on the ground up there to model that behavior that we expect, following the standards and norms and rules of behavior of a rules-based society. That's what the Coast Guard is keen to do in the Arctic.
Okay, well, thank you. And let's look at really what's been developing with Finland. What are the implications, Jan Kusela, of Finland's membership of NATO for security in the region? How are you viewing this? I mean, you're also the defence advisor at the mission of Finland to NATO headquarters in 2006 onwards, and certainly you've got a great insight into this.
Yeah, well, if you look at Finland's location, its strategic location is quite important for NATO. We are lying between High North and Baltic Sea and cover both regions. And what we bring to NATO is, first of all, a lot of landmass. I think if you combine Finland, Sweden, and Norway, we are roughly 1 million square kilometers of landmass, and previously the Arctic meant more maritime issues for the alliance. We bring lots of land border with Russia, 1,340 kilometers in total, but we also we bring lots of defense capability, and we are well versed to guard and defend the EU's and NATO's border with Russia. And like Norway, also Finland offers know-how or know-how in Arctic warfare. And I think it's in our common interest that the alliance's Arctic IQ is on a high level, and we can keep military wheels rolling also in the High North when needed. And that's why we have invested a lot in training and exercises, and I think this year will be a record level of activities we have in the north, both in Finland and in other Nordic countries. And we, of course, are building all this on the existing good cooperation among the Nordic countries.
Okay, well, many thanks for that. Commander Staffan Lundqvist, can you distinguish between threats in the Arctic as opposed to threats to and through the Arctic? And so what different approaches should there be for the different scenarios?
Well, I think actually the first challenge when we discuss threats to Arctic security is actually to determine who is being threatened. And having made that clear, the next step is to define the character of a threat, and then we must figure out how to go about to respond to it. So, as a dignity is also that our understanding of Arctic threats may differ, and they may differ quite widely, because there are different types of security. And I usually use 5 sectors of security to discuss this, and actually what is in them. So in the environmental sectors, we address threats from climate change. And in the economic sector, we discuss threats to like economic growth. In the political sector, we discuss issues of sovereignty. And in the societal sector, it's all about population growth and migration. And of course, in the military sector, we address military threats. So when in the Arctic, we have these increased Arctic shipping, and that illustrates actually the threats coming through the Arctic. While we have deep sea mining, we have oil and gas exploration, we have overfishing, and they all pose environmental threats to the Arctic. Of course, climate change is the biggest threat because it affects entire Arctic ecosystems. So managing threats to and through the Arctic is require multilateral cooperation. And this is why we must maintain cooperation in the Arctic Council. And I'm so happy that we still have these working groups still operating, because here we can address the needs of Arctic indigenous populations who populate the entire Arctic, including in Russia. Then we have the grave military threats emanating from the Arctic. And to Russia and China, the Arctic is an attractive vector, an attack vector, for long-range missile strikes on the United States. And it's for one simple reason, is because it provides the shortest distance from Eurasia to North America. And one more thing, our monitoring of the Arctic isn't sufficient. And China is a custodian of a robust long-range air and missile inventory, and reinforces the significance of the Arctic as a staging ground for conventional air and cruise missile attacks. So what does NATO do? It focuses on building situational awareness and information superiority in the Arctic. it also seeks capability to take actions to defeat enemy missiles right of launch, but only in response to kinetic and non-kinetic actions. So I believe that if we want to gain the advantage we need to deter Russia and China from taking military action in the Arctic and from the Arctic, we must deal with military threats from the Arctic in a NATO setting.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I mean, it's hugely complex, web of threats and challenges right now. Let me bring in President Holmberg. Obviously, the commander is talking about the need to understand the threats to indigenous peoples living right across the Arctic region. But how are Sami reacting to the prospects of increased military activity, particularly given that the Arctic is seen as a region for peace?
We certainly hope and are committed to having Arctic remain as a region of peace. I'm sure that is of the interest of us all. First, I want to say that also a lot of Sami do have security concerns, and in that sense welcome a military presence in the area by bringing a feeling of safety, security. That being said, there are challenges with the increased military activities in the north. I can say that the negotiation between the Sami rights holders on the use of territories, on military practices, that can be strengthened because there are examples when there have been negative impacts. If a military exercise drives through a reindeer herd, it scatters all around, creating extra work for the communities. So it is with the increase of this activity, it also brings the need to increase the communication and also joint planning. Also, there are some environmental concerns because, as we know, the Arctic environment can be very fragile. So it's, I would say that the Sami knowledge would have also a lot to contribute into this knowing of the nature, knowing where and when it's appropriate to do what kind of activities. As our colleague said, the word snow-how, then Sami definitely
Yes.
also have a lot of snow-how.
Absolutely, I can see certainly how that information sharing really is so important. We'll delve deeper into this during the session. State Secretary, I just wanted to ask you that, still looking at this kind of more strategic level, what are the consequences from Norway's point of view of the Finnish and potential Swedish membership of NATO?
Well, Sweden and Finland joining NATO will definitely strengthen NATO's deterrence and defense posture in the Nordic region. As it has been said already, Sweden and Finland represents a large area. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think with Finland joining NATO, Russia's land border to NATO doubled. And NATO has assumed responsibility to protect a much bigger area. But at the same time, both Sweden and Finland will be net contributors to NATO shortly after their accession. And their accession opens up new possibilities for cooperation and for joining forces in the Nordic region. For instance, taken together, our common aircraft fleet will be 250 fighter aircrafts. That's a very considerable fleet at the same size of, for instance, the French or the British fleet. And it also opens up a lot of ways in which we can cooperate, train and exercise together that hasn't really been possible up until this point. And for Norway, even though we have been members of NATO since the organization was founded, this is the first time we share a land border with allies. So we are facing a very big change in the way we plan and work together with our neighbors. And I think first and foremost for Norway, this represents a lot of opportunities to do things better. For instance, when it comes to investments, I think there are many ways where we can invest smartly together and look at the capabilities, the capability gaps that exist, and look together how we fill them.
Okay, thank you very much, State Secretary. Jan Kusela, in what ways have Nordic cooperation, defence cooperation, already been shifting up gears in recent years? And are you seeing this level of cooperation expected to accelerate as a result of these NATO changes?
Yeah, I mean, to start with, what we have among the 5 Nordic countries is exceptionally high level of trust on each other's. And that's a very solid foundation for defense cooperation and working together. And we always known that in the High North, Norway, Finland, Sweden, we are the first responders, whatever happens. So we need to be able to act together. And now there's a new era for us when Finland entered, and hopefully Sweden will very soon enter NATO, because earlier we had lots of restrictions, lots of political restrictions, what could be done among NATO and non-NATO countries. And now those restrictions are gone, so now we can do what we think is important to do. And also the focus has now shifted. We used to be quite a lot nationally focused, but now when we soon are all 5 NATO countries, we can fully focus on how can we together make NATO's defense and deterrence stronger here in the north. There's lots of hard work behind. We've worked on this for the past 1.5 years a lot, and we will finalize the work as soon as Sweden becomes member. The main issues are things like joint operational planning, exercises, logistics, military mobility, and also lots of cooperation on total defense. And also we have now a new grip on armaments and industrial cooperation. We traditionally have not been very good on that, but the war in Ukraine has clearly demonstrated that we have to do this. So the outlook is very good and promising, but we have a lot to do. And we have to take into account the specific requirements of the demanding conditions in the Arctic.
Okay, many thanks. Commander, what can you add in terms of the implications of Sweden's membership of NATO? In what way will it help this concept as well of total preparedness?
Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to joining, and I hope that actually within February this will solve, but who knows, things can drag on even more. Sweden is located as a geostrategic crossroads. That's not something new. It's been like that for centuries. And we have the largest territory on the Scandinavian peninsula. And actually, what will we be in the NATO? We will serve as a staging area in NATO's defense of its northern flank, which will be like in a key center for making that defense happening. And when I would ask, what does the Swedish population think about all this? Well, recent polls show that they are very willing to defend our sovereignty, even more than one could expect. There's been a rise that has been tremendous. And as a NATO ally, what is changing now is a big transformation. I mean, we've been having this neutrality and non-alliance idea for decades. And actually, we should now defend not Swedish territory, we should defend NATO territory. We shouldn't defend just our society, but we should defend the societies of all our allies. Okay, and one can think about how is this going to happen, but I think we already can see it. Right now, we have an ongoing NATO exercise, Steadfast Defender. I think it illustrates quite well how it's going to be done. And to Sweden, as my colleague Anna-Maria here and Jan has said, it's about us together. It actually illustrates the Nordic-Baltic dimension of security. This is a fundamental aspect that we consider fully when we plan and think about defense. Okay, so stay out of war and being capable to ward off all sorts of attack against our society. That's why we have, since the Second World War, have this idea about total preparedness and total defense. So it's just now a new iteration of a long-standing concept. So our society is bracing for and building resilience to manage threats from Russia. And we believe that if our society is strong, and if our society is resilient, and if we make Russian leaders understand that, well, we may deter Russia from launching attacks. And when one would ask, how would that function? Well, it's because Russia will know, but it will struggle to achieve its desired effects. And this is deterrence by resilience. We don't stay there, because through our military capabilities, we seek to deter aggression by making the aggressor incapable. That means denying them the capability of achieving their desired gains. So they might attack us, but it will cost more than what it gets. So, and this is deterrence by denial. And then, of course, joining NATO make us, in a NATO context, able to impose costs on Russia as well.
Okay, many thanks. And I just want to pick up on you talked about exercises, you also did as well in terms of Finland's point of view. Well, let me bring it back in, Rear Admiral Moore. I mean, there's a lot of cooperation within the Arctic Council and the Arctic Coast Guard. How is that talk of cooperation actually now moving into action?
Yeah, thank you. We are making a key effort to operationalize those forums, right? I mean, they are designed to strengthen capability and show resolve as a allied group. And so the way that we do that is to actually get out on the water together, right? I mean, we have talked for years about being like-minded, and we're happy to come to conferences and do things, but at the end of the day, we have to get out on the water and operate. And so what we're doing right now is, as a team, the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, which is a really fantastic organization, actually chaired by Norway for these next couple of years, is we are working towards a exercise that we're actually gonna scope it and set it up this year, and then in 2025 we are going to do a search and rescue and environmental response exercise in the Arctic, right off of Tromsø here, with icebreakers and ice-hardened ships of all partner nations within the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, and we will be out on the water together, actually demonstrating and cooperating with all those assets in the same place to work what is a very realistic scenario. I mean, something bad is going to happen in the Arctic. It's a matter of time. There will be a cruise ship on fire. There will be an oil tanker that hits something. There will be some human catastrophe that requires response. And that is, again, because of that activity that I mentioned earlier, that the statistics will show you that it is a matter of time before something happens. And so we are intent on operationalizing these forums and actually being prepared for that.
There's a question, Rear Admiral, which has come from the audience about NATO membership. Soon every Nordic country will be part of NATO. Do you think it's time for a standalone NATO Arctic strategy? What should be in a strategy like that? What shouldn't? Could it help the operations for the US Coast Guard, for example? This question is for you.
For me? Well, I don't think I can really speak to NATO. I don't think that's really in my wheelhouse. I would tell you, for the Coast Guard and for the United States in the Arctic, we have a very defined strategy that flows down from the White House. We have a national strategy for the Arctic region. The U.S. Coast Guard has a strategy that plays directly off of that. So I feel like we have a good sort of alignment with what we are doing. The Arctic Coast Guard Forum, what we do in other parts of the world in a similar vein, all align us closely with the allies, but I'm probably not the best person to speak to NATO.
Do you have a view on that? Should there be a standalone NATO Arctic strategy?
I think the Arctic is a very big region. It is actually a region in its own respect. So from that position, yes. Then we also need to understand that the name of the game is competition. It's great power competition, and this great power competition is kind of global because, let's say, states tend to cluster. And then this competition is now being played out in the Arctic. So that needs to be taken into consideration. But the Arctic is such a huge area that, yeah, I agree in that. But it should not be a closed strategy because it is not, the Arctic doesn't operate like that. The Arctic is a domain where also, threats go through the Arctic.
Okay, many thanks for that. Now, obviously, with the increase in exercises, and you mentioned, President Holmberg, about information sharing, to what extent does that already go on between, for example, reindeer herders and military forces? And in what way can that also contribute to this concept of kind of total defense, total preparedness, civil society?
Yeah, of course there is to some extent information sharing, but I don't think it should be only a matter of information sharing, but actually jointly planning these activities with the people who are mostly using these areas. in order to avoid conflict. Like there are some areas that are especially vulnerable at specific seasons. For example, during calving season, you can cause great harm in these territories. So definitely there is a need to strengthen this communication and joint planning. I would say that in general, everything that contributes to the well-being of people, of the populations in the north, has to do with preparedness. So we need communities that are thriving, we need people who can live in the north, also including those practicing traditional livelihoods. Because it is these people who spend their days out there in the nature who are also the experts of their areas. And it has been shown in many cases that Sami have a great role in emergency response, like search and rescue missions, because these are the people who know their territories the best. Also, considering the matter of food security, Sami traditional practitioners have a very important role, considering reindeer herders, fishers, hunters. They do have an essential role in the food security for the whole area. So I do think we have to consider this matter holistically and think about all these aspects.
Okay, many thanks. So, State Secretary, to what extent is what the President's saying going to be a factor in Norway's long-term plan for the defence sector? How do you respond to those concerns and integrate it actually into policy?
Well, let me first say that the increased military activity and the build-up of military infrastructure has to do with the security situation. So it's something that we need to do. That being said, we as a government and as a ministry, we are required to consult the Sami parliament and other who speak on behalf of Sami interests when our activities affect Sami interests. And this is, of course, especially important to us because military activity is something that generally doesn't go very well with reindeer herding. All right, military training tends to be very noisy, and you shoot stuff and you bump stuff, and it doesn't always go very well with reindeer herding or other kinds of herding as well. Therefore, it is important for us as a government to listen to Sami interests and the way our activities are affecting them, and to try as much as we can to mitigate the negative consequences as long as it doesn't compromise our national security interests and our preparedness.
Okay, many thanks. And talking about that preparedness, you look at it as kind of total preparedness for civil society as well. Finland has a reputation for a really pan-society approach to security and resilience for this. What do you think it needs in terms of the level of local community participation? What should communities right across the Arctic be prepared for?
Yes, we have long traditions for preparedness and resilience, and they are basically built on lessons learned the hard way. Norway has never fought with Russia. We have, and I think I've lost count how many times we have done that in our history. And the focus for us ever since the Second World War has been that how can we prevail and survive another major conventional conflict or major crisis. We have two concepts, total defense and comprehensive security. And to your question, on total defense, it's the two-way relationship between defense forces and the local communities. For defense forces to be able to do their work and defend the country, they need many kinds of support from the local communities. And on the other way around, the defense forces always stand ready to support local communities, be it search and rescue, handling natural disasters, or any other such catastrophes. The other concept is comprehensive security, and that's how we ensure the vital functions of our society in all situations. And that's based on thoroughgoing cooperation on all levels. It's the public authorities, border guards, police, defense forces, government, but it's also the local communities, business sector, industry, NGOs, church, academia, and we bring them together in this model, and everybody can do their share in this joint effort. And in the Arctic region, I think Aslak Holmberg raised some very important issues here, and what we focus on especially is preserving the very fragile Arctic environment. We want to make sure that we leave a minimum print when we have exercises, for example, and we do our share in minimizing the carbon dioxide emissions. We are a big energy consumer in defense forces, and that's why it has a certain importance. And we work a lot in Finland with the Reindeer Herders Association to make sure that we take into account and respect the natural cycle of reindeer herding and don't hurt that livelihood. And of course, when we invest in infrastructure in the Arctic region, we have to do it in good cooperation with local communities and industry and business sector.
Okay, many thanks. It's really interesting to see the huge range of integration that you do with the local community. Let me bring back in Rear Admiral Moore, because you were in charge of the District 17 in Alaska during Typhoon Merbok. What did this show you about the need for preparedness, and what lessons have you learned?
Yeah, thank you. There are some Alaskans here in the crowd, and remember Merbok from a year and a half ago. That was a typhoon. That was a rotating storm that went across the Aleutians and across the Bering, eastward in the Bering Sea, and impacted the west coast of Alaska. So the weather is bad a lot out there, and just like it is here this week and other times. But a rotating typhoon that actually lands shore in Alaska is exceedingly rare, and so it did a tremendous amount of damage, both structural damage, fuel systems, permafrost permanently destroyed, that kind of thing. And so now I've come in this summer to the Atlantic coast, to my current job, to work in the Atlantic coast, and we've had a busy hurricane season this last year, hurricanes that ran up the east coast of Alaska, of the country of America, and impacted Nova Scotia, even impacted Iceland some, as we saw up in the far North Atlantic. And so it occurs to me that these storms that we say are anomalies are becoming more and more common. And there actually are great similarities between what Merbok did to Alaska and what we are likely to see in the Atlantic Arctic and the European Arctic. And so from the U.S. Coast Guard standpoint, the way that we handle those hurricane disaster responses is a very tried and true process. If you live in Florida or Louisiana today, we've learned our lessons over the years in the U.S. of how to deal with that, and you have a evacuation plan, there's a season, and we announce it, and you have builded teams that go out and do work. We have alerts that are issued, and we test that alert in May and say, hey, the season's starting. When we notify you, you need to evacuate. And then when the evacuation happens, it's more orderly. I guess my point is, I think what we could do is look at that framework that we use in the lower 48 for hurricanes, and you could almost flip that same framework up into the Arctic for disaster response. And that is something that, Arctic nations, we just haven't thought about it in those terms. How do you evacuate an entire village, and where do they go, right? That's not easy in Alaska, and it's not easy a lot of places in the Arctic. Those are things that the Coast Guard has decades of history dealing with, those sort of massive emergency responses, and I think we can help.
It certainly really is food for thought, Rear Admiral. And there's a question that has come in about Norwegian politics, Norwegian citizens. Are we in tune with the new security situation in Europe? Do we need a wake-up call from the peaceful times of the last decades? I mean, in many ways, you could widen that to say, do we need a wake-up call to the threats also posed for the Arctic region from climate change? So there's kind of two angles to this. State Secretary, what's your response to that?
When it comes to the security situation, I think February 2022 was a real wake-up call. I think a lot of people started waking up, and we are in this, I see it as a transition phase between the deep, deep peace that characterized the 30 years from the end of the Cold War and up until approximately where we are now. and into this new phase that we're now in with heightened tensions between not just Russia and the West, but authoritarian states and the West. I think we have, over those 30 years with deep peace, we have built down a lot of not only our defense structures, but also our defense industry, our preparedness, things like storage facilities. And I think we need to start thinking about how to be prepared for a society and an everyday life where everything isn't perfect, and where things can go wrong, and where we might need to do more to better our own situation. I think it's very important for us to do that as individuals, but it's also very, very important for us to do that as a government and as society.
So Commander, from the Swedish point of view, what do we need to do to ensure these strategies, combining civil, military efforts to build up these total defence capabilities, what strategies should be taken, but what values need to be taken into account as well?
Drawing on Anna-Marie's comment, actually Sweden, we created a concept of total defense in the Second World War, learning from what happened around us and realizing what we needed to do. And then we mounted it down after the end of the Cold War, because we thought we were living in a period of extended peace, and now we are building it up again, and actually we tore much of it down. So, and if we want to render our total defense organizations effective, I'm quite sure that we need to inspire them with social values. And we need a common vision for the future. What is worth defending, if I put it like that? So we must formulate missions that a majority of our citizens can unite around. And actually, when we give assignments to our authorities who are supposed to lead the work of total defense, we must define and communicate political strategic objectives. And then we also need structured processes to follow up on the assignments we give for these authority agencies, and actually determine whether or not the measures our authorities implement do create the intended effects. So, coming to your question, what are our values? Well, I trust they consist of our ethics, the principles on which our society rests on, and this is not talking just not to Sweden, but I think I'm talking to a broader range of states here, but also the ideals we believe in and what ideals we stand up for. And here I'm thinking about democracy, I'm thinking about legal certainty, and I'm thinking about individual rights to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And actually, they are being put at threat these days. And I believe that our visions visualize our hopes and our ambitions. Actually, what we want to achieve needs to be built into these ones. And when we know what we need to accomplish and why we need to do that, we can prioritize and implement the most appropriate measures to get there at an acceptable cost, because this will be costly and hopefully also in the right time.
Okay, many thanks for that. And just building on that kind of cooperation, President Holmberg, in what way would you say indigenous businesses are already trying to contribute to this preparedness?
Well, yes, I mentioned already the food security aspect, but I know there have always also been collaborations between small local businesses and the military. Like I heard there is an example of a bakery in Laxell that is working with the military. There is a Sami company in Karasjohka who have been providing some kartanka, I don't know what's it in English, like very warm woolen insoles for the military. So of course, whatever possibilities there are for local companies, then Sami are also willing to take part in that.
Thank you. A couple of questions, because we're running out of time, but I want to get through them. State Secretary, question for you. Is Norway considering talking again to Russia to find a way to work together in the question of Arctic issues instead of increasing military presence? I mean, there is this concern that this NATO expansion could, as you mentioned earlier, could it lead to kind of misunderstanding and actually exacerbate the situation when there might be other softer avenues of diplomacy?
So there are certain channels of information sharing with the Russians going on today. Even though political contact does not happen today, we have some information sharing when it comes to border issues, when it comes to search and rescue, and when it comes to fisheries, for example. So we do keep some kinds of dialogue across the border going. But political dialogue at this point is just not possible between Russia and NATO countries. And I think for diplomacy to have an effect, I think both parties need to be ready to talk and use diplomacy as an instrument. And we just do not see the perspective of that in Moscow right now.
Okay, many thanks for that response. Another question that's come through, I wonder if you can answer this. In your view, what are the chances that Russia will miscalculate the military strength of NATO in the North and Scandinavian countries in the same manner as they seem to have miscalculated the resilience and resistance of Ukraine?
Well, I think it's in our best interest is to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that's why all we do to support NATO's deterrence and defense is getting us to the right way. And of course, I mean, I think we should never underestimate Russian intelligence capabilities, and I think they have a pretty good understanding of both of our capabilities and also of our policies, and I think the risk for that kind of event is still quite low.
Okay, well, many thanks. Now, we are out of time. I don't want to spill over into the next panel because we have so much more to talk about. So please do give this panel, it's been superb insights here, a big round of applause. So thank you very much for everybody. Thank you. And if you'd like to leave the stage that way, thank you. Thank you again to the panel for a really fascinating discussion. So we're now going to delve much deeper into this concept of total preparedness and how it may bolster resilience against a myriad threats, really. Let's look at one of them. And this is, of course, the threat of wildfires. This threat has been looming ever large. So please do watch this video, this film, from the view of the Arctic Council Secretariat, and it's narrated by the VP from the Inuit Circumpolar Council.
Good day, everybody. My name is Herb Engek-Nakamayak. I'm an Executive Council member for Inuit Circumpolar Council Canada. I'll give you a short debrief on the 2023 wildfire season in Northwest Territories. Severe to extreme drought dominated much of the Northwest Territories. This drought resulted in deep burning fires that were very difficult to contain. There were no rain events throughout the summer to help slow the spread of fires. Rather, less than 8% of the normal amount of rain fell in the last 3 months of the season. Extreme weather events with record-breaking heat and very strong winds had a profound influence on fire spread. As an example, one fire spread over 75 kilometers in one day. By the end of the fire season, 304 fires had burned over 4 million hectares of forests. The 2023 fire season is the most impactful season experienced in Northwest Territories, with many challenging fires near communities. Throughout the summer, 12 communities had to be evacuated. 2 of those communities were evacuated twice. At one point in August, nearly 70% of the Northwest Territories population was evacuated, including the capital city of Yellowknife. For the first time ever, homes in a community were lost due to fire, and this repeated itself in 6 communities. There were also dozens of cabins lost along highways, rivers, and high-use areas. Here in the picture is the community of Samba Cay. On top of having multiple communities impacted by fire, the government of Northwest Territories lost one of their own on July 15th. Fire crew member Adam Yaden was hit by a tree on the fire line fighting a fire near his hometown in Fort Liard. This was the first fire line fatality experienced in 52 years. Given the severity of the fire season, fire personnel had very little time to grieve as the next wave of fire season continued. The drought resulted in extreme burning conditions across most of the NWT. For the first time ever, fire bans were put in place covering entire regions. Firefighters had to be brought in from across Canada. Also, fire personnel from the United States, New Zealand, and even South Africa came to the NWT's aid. The impacts of these fires in 2023 are an example of what possibly could happen in 2024. Given the significance of these fires, My questions to the panelists are, how can we help communities in terms of emergency plans? And number two, how do we help communities prepare and execute their community emergency plans? Kuyanani to the North Government of Northwest Territories and Inuit Circumpolar Council for giving this opportunity. Also Arctic Frontiers for allowing me to give this brief presentation. Kuyanani, thank you.
So really highlighting one of the challenges, certainly building on what Rear Admiral Moore said about that need, of course, to be prepared in the face of the growing threat of typhoons. So to answer some of these questions, I'm very pleased to welcome our next panel. Major General Randy Church-Key, who's a Senior Advisor at the Ted Stevens Center for Arctic Security Studies. Also, Edward Alexander, co-chair of Gwich'in International Council. Anya Telovo-Hansen, project manager at Sami Nyanthangla. Jarmo Husso, chairman of the City Council of Hulu, and Jackie Jacobson, sergeant for the Canadian Rangers. So please do give them all a round of applause. Lovely to meet you. Do take a seat. Hello, Edward. Nice to meet you. Please take a seat. Hi. Hi. Great to meet you. Hello. Do take a seat. Hi, Jackie. First of all, Major General, if I could start with you. I mean, we talked a lot about broad trends when it comes to security in that first panel and how it affects the Arctic. But why is it so important that the specific context of each Arctic community is really considered when we try and reach for these solutions?
Thank you. First of all, granularity really matters. If you've been to one Arctic community, you've been to one Arctic community. Geography, topography, animal and marine life, infrastructure, transportation, access to energy, and other resources, thinking things such as commerce, culture, government presence, crisis response and responders, and population diversity all factor to this equation. Ultimately from this, so people matter most. Taking the time to understand the local situation, where people have local and place-based knowledge so you can tailor plans and programs, ultimately response, to add that community resilience. You have to listen and learn, think, consider, and communicate.
Thank you very much. It really sums it up. And let's look, really onto the ground now. And Edward Alexander, how, in your view, from the view as well of Gwich'in Council International, what is the best way of building resilience and really sustainable communities who can not just function in peacetime, but also in times of crisis?
Well, first of all, thank you to the Sami for hosting us here in Sapmi, Ulakito. Very much appreciate the wonderful hospitality of the people of Tromsø this week as well. For Gwich'in communities, we've been in the north for tens of thousands of years, and I think one of the things I heard this week from Mr. Orrin Young that was interesting to me was about narrative. And he had said, we need a new narrative to kind of understand where we're going forward. This is true, but there's also ancient narratives, right? And so when we think about resilience, what does that mean? Does it mean a resilient community of 5 years? Or does it mean a resilient community of 10,000 years? So we have to bring perspective to it. And in the north, you saw the fires that, in this wonderful video from ICC and the Arctic Council Secretariat in the Northwest Territories, but also frightening, right? 40 million acres burning in Canada, and the impacts that it has on communities across the region, the evacuation of Yellowknife of 70% of the population, huge economic impacts, food security impacts, trap lines being burned, hunting areas being burned. These kinds of fires don't just have a one-year impact, right? They have multi-year impacts. And so when we think about sustainable communities in the north, one of the things that we really have to consider is how does the north, how does the Arctic make the rest of the world sustainable already? Where I'm from, I grew up in the largest forest on planet Earth, the boreal forest. And underneath that boreal forest, there's a sleeping danger to us all. And that's Yeroma. That's a very particular kind of permafrost that's in our Gwich'in homelands. It's also in Russia. People in Scandinavia are not as familiar with it because it doesn't exist here. But in this kind of permafrost, when we see these giant fires in the Northwest Territory, the fires are frightening, but underneath the soil is something even more frightening, which is a very fragile permafrost that has as much greenhouse gases as the atmosphere of the entire planet collectively. And so if you think about this Yedema with its 480 gigaton of greenhouse gases, of methane, it could be right next to small Gwich'in village. And our chiefs file resolutions and positions and saying, we need to protect these structures. They actually underpin the sustainability of the entire planet. And from the outside, we hear people saying, well, how can we make your community sustainable? Well, that's an interesting proposition when it is Arctic communities that have underpinned the sustainability of the entire planet for millennia. The ecosystem services that the permafrost and these Yedema provide and storing all of this carbon is what protects all of your homes, right? It protects all of your societies, your food security, etc. And so we can't just talk about hard security when we talk about our communities. We have to talk about the actual threats. Nothing else drove 70% of the people of the Northwest Territory out of their homes. Nothing else caused the evacuation of Old Crow this year. It was the climate crisis. And so we have to first understand this ancient narrative that's actually in the North and what underpins the foundation of all of the stuff that's happening out here. And really understand that there has been a sustainable development in the North for a long, long time that's allowed the rest of the world to exist as it has and not destroying it.
It certainly does really train the focus on the fact that it's a climate emergency. And obviously at the same time, there are other kind of security emergencies taking place right now. And you also have had quite a lot of impact, Jackie Jacobson, in terms of trying to be the eyes and ears on the ground, really, haven't you, when it comes to helping the military forces? Can you explain what you've done with the Canadian Rangers, what kind of guide that you've been following, and how actually it could help other communities?
Yeah, thank you for that. No, with our Canadian Ranger program, we have we're 1,500 Rangers strong. We go through 60 communities through the Western Arctic. We have and we work in a 2 million square kilometer area of we work in. So what the biggest thing that I think that we, as a Canadian Ranger program, and what we've been working is we're the eyes and ears of in the community, and we're volunteers, and we're like 99% of the Rangers are born and raised in the community that they're working in. So we know some things out of the ordinary that we deal with, and we do work with the community as a whole, with the Hamlet Council and the community corporations in the community, and we keep open dialogue with them all the time in regards to anything that, just like with the wildfires this year, they had in Yellowknife, one CRPG out of Yellowknife was a big part of the evacuation of 26,000 individuals within 3 days. And I'm really proud to say that, and they did an awesome job. But as Rangers, we're the eyes and ears, and we're the ones that do local search and rescues. And we're proud to do what we do, and we're looking, myself, I'm looking forward to working with other countries to implement the Ranger program.
And so the Ranger program has been formed in cooperation with the Ted Stevens Centre, I understand. And tell us a little bit about kind of that guide and that program and how it could, you think, be used by other communities across the Arctic.
I think the Ranger program has been around since 1945. Like I said, we have 1,600 Rangers. We do work hand in hand with as a Canadian Ranger Patrol Group, one CRPG, worked with Ted Stevens, and my Colonel, Honorary Colonel Whitney Lockenbauer, he's a big proponent in what we're doing with the Ranger program, implementing and trying to. It's been a big thing for me in regards to working with other countries, because as a Ranger, not only that as a Ranger, but as a Aboriginal from in the area, you're related to right across the Arctic. You have relatives. So I have family in Alaska. I'm really proud, and I have family here in Scandinavia, and so this program is going to help so many people in regards to, one, you know, you're resilient, you're using your voice, be able to work with them, to be voices. I think it's the program itself is would go a long way with the Arctic nations as a whole if we were able to do that. And like with the Canadian Ranger patrol groups that we do have, we worked with with the Norwegians and with diving teams coming from here all the way up to Tut, where I'm from, and we worked with them for like 2 weeks at a time, and it was good to see my good friend Steinmar. He's a Norwegian diver here, so we had supper the other night. So it's just making friends and taking care of each other in the north like how we normally do.
Lovely. It's good to hear that. Anja Televo Hansen, you're the project manager at Sami Hallingsjö. Can you tell me a little bit more about what your group does in terms of enabling the Sami business community to work with military forces and to support them, and how it actually is benefiting communities?
Yeah, so our project, we started up in 2020, and we've had different activities where we invited companies to learn more about public procurements, where we've also invited partners from the military and the armed forces to inform about their upcoming competitions. And we have seen that more local companies are becoming suppliers for the armed forces in Norway. The project actually have 95% success rate, if you can say that, where local companies or regional companies in the northern part of Norway got contracts now that they are rebuilding the military in the north.
And you've carried out some recent research, haven't you, showing about kind of best practice and the ways that other businesses can secure these opportunities. What does it show you about how these can be best realized?
One thing is that the companies need to know about the competitions early, so that they are able to prepare for the competition. And we can see that in Finnmark, the companies are very small, so they don't have an administration. It's normally the owner who's in the production who's also delivering their offers for the procurements. And that's a difficult part for them, for the smallest companies. So yeah.
Yes, certainly must be. They've got to literally do everything. And obviously, around them, there are the local authorities. Maybe they could play a greater role. Let's bring in Jarmo Husso, who's the chairman of the City Council of Oulu. I mean, what is the role, from your perspective, of city authorities in terms of security and preparedness, but also actually supporting local businesses who are helping support the infrastructure?
Thank you. Like Mr. Kuusela said, we have this Finnish method, the comprehensive security concept. Could be an export product, by the way. We didn't do the mistakes that the Secretary of State was telling earlier. We didn't cut down the defense costs. And of course, this concept is legislated by the government. But when you take it down to the local level, we are the safeguard to implement the requirements and also define the safe, secure city. It's difficult, but in a hotel there was a floor mat this morning. It said hygge, and it had a definition of what the hygge is. And if the city is hygge, I mean, answers your question, but heating, water, critical infrastructure, schooling, businesses can flourish, and it's a feeling. You don't have no fear of threat, and you feel safe. You probably want to know if we take measurements to take our responsibility for the concept on a local level. I'll tell you an example. I probably shouldn't say this, but we take rehearsals. Just before I left here, a gentleman in charge of the rehearsals, I said, "What's wrong this time?" "Oh, nothing major. We just lost a water station with the pumps, and we have 100,000 people without the drinking water in the city of Oulu, which is 200,000 people. I said, nothing major? No, but 3 days from that, everything that has put down from the toilets for the last 2 weeks, it starts coming up. That's major.
Yes, absolutely. And so these exercises are a key part of your strategy, are they, to make sure the city and the local authority is prepared for security situation changes, for environmental crises?
We have a command center, management team, operational team, executive staff, and we have, of course, tried to think of all the scenarios possible, but we know that there are things that are unthinkable. I take an example a few years back. Anybody remember that we had a COVID-19 pandemic? In less than a week, our city was able, together with the help of the NGOs, to organize a system where every person, every household that had members of over age of 65 was phoned and asking, how are you? They were isolated in their homes, they didn't dare to go to the grocery store, and to some of them, it was the only phone call for a couple of years. And we heard all the stories of the relatives at the same time. But it just shows how important of all these legislations and regulations, blah, blahs, the third sector, what we call, is very important. You have to be in good relationship with them.
Absolutely. Jaume Jose, thank you very much. Let me bring back in Randy Church-Key. I mean, you've listened to what he's been saying about that example. What really needs to be in place to ensure you build local resilience? And also, crucially, what are the best ways of building trust within communities to ensure that they do what the authorities demand?
Right, thank you for that. So I guess a couple things would perhaps be helpful here. You can't have national security unless you have human security at the local level. You also need to understand and characterize the nature of the threat to the local population, also in context of the threat to the national security. So understanding those threats and characterizing the risks really matter. It's important to take a planning construct, ranging the, if you will, the challenges you face from the geophysical to the geostrategic. The proximity to the threat does drive part of the solution problems. When you look at today that each community's situation is unique. If you take a look at the geography of the Arctic, and I'll talk about the Arctic 7 at this point, you go to Gamble and St. Lawrence Island, to Nome, to Uktiavik, Kaktovik, Tuktoyaktuk, Yellowknife, Nuuk, Akkari, Rovaniemi, Tromsø. There's a few items of those that are of those different communities that are similar and common. But most of them are wildly different and wildly different. So if you look at that context and then start going to the communities and learning the values of those communities and listening first, planners from government, planners from commercial industries, they're going to try to help provide solutions. First, start with listening. Next, start thinking about how do we tailor-make solutions that work for that community. And then find ways to think about commonalities between those communities. I'm thinking about what Patty Rose is doing with the Arctic Mayors Forum, a chance to cross-tell between the Arctic communities. If you think about the aspects of that listening, learning, planning, coordinating, then you get to the business of resourcing. And everything in the Arctic costs more. Everything in the Arctic takes longer to develop and to achieve. So patience matters. But if you start with the values of what matters to that community, and understanding specifically the values of the people who have been part of the Arctic since time began. I can go to talk to my colleagues from Gwich'in country, and I'm going to get a whole different perspective than when I go to the Inupiat community. Some things are going to be similar, but many things will be very uniquely different. So to me, the granularity does matter, as I mentioned earlier. And it's also the aspect that the matter of time. Time is different in the high north from perhaps the lower latitudes in the northern hemisphere in particular. And particularly the more rural you get, the way the time is actually much, much different. Rural Arctic time is perhaps a little bit slower than perhaps in the lower latitudes. Those are some thoughts.
That's good for me. I need to slow down, so I definitely think that I should be visiting those communities a lot more often. Annie, I know you wanted to come in on this point.
Yeah, just about the part about the listening to the locals. Aslak also mentioned earlier that you need to listen to the locals and the Sami and the indigenous people. They do have a lot of competence and a lot of knowledge about what actually works in the Arctic. Like Saratwetji, the company in Karasjok that delivers the wool insoles, they have delivered to the military for a long, long time, and just recently lost the competition, this time just because of a formality that could have been solved. They've changed their organization form and were lacking 3 years of accounting or the documentation. So just a formality that could have been solved.
So what kind of extra support would you say that these businesses do need? And how can they get it? Is it not there at the moment? How can we set up those links?
So the thing is that a lot of the procurements now are done on a national level. So the local companies are not able to even compete because the contracts are so huge. They have to be divided into smaller contracts, smaller areas. Like the local bakery in Laxalv, they are not able to supply the whole part of Norway because it is quite a large area. If that contract for bread, for example, bakery goods could have been divided into just Finnmark or just for the camps, just the military camps around, they could have been delivered. They could have delivered the bread from a local bakery that drives past the military base every day. Now they are getting their bread from further south. They have to travel over a mountain during winter. That might be closed. We're not getting fresh bread. The local military wants the local bread, but they're not able to get it. So we hope that the contracts and the procurements will be done at a lower level, closer to the base and not the big national contracts, because that is quite difficult for the small companies and the local SMEs.
John Mahusa, can the city authorities play a role in that? What is the kind of cascade of power when it comes to procurement? Can you intervene and say, look, central government, we need to change this?
I represent politicians, and that's what we do every day. But the results are not so clearly to be seen, but I understand the message and I understand the need. But I'm a first timer in this conference, but I enjoyed the atmosphere of unity and conversation and cooperation. It applies to your question too. Keep up the spirits and make yourself stand, and things gonna be okay.
The message is taken, I think.
Yeah.
So let me just move back to you, Edward. I was struck by something that Randy Church-Key just said about human security at a local level. What is your concept of human security? Do you think that sometimes, even the basic necessities of life are overlooked in your community?
Well, I think part of the issue when we think about human security is that we're always thinking of it again in terms of defense of our people. Our Gwich'in chiefs, they had a meeting in November, and I went to the meeting, and they were talking about security but it was interesting to me, and I think it'd be interesting to you to hear, that they were talking about the security of the moose in the Yukon Flats, right? the security of those moose being able to access the food that they need to access, the security of caribou, the security of muskrat, right? And so within concerns, I always think about my Sami friends, they're always concerned about the ice on the snow and protecting their reindeer and the food and all this. Well, we're very concerned too, not about our own security. They're saying, who's looking out for these muskrat? Who's looking out for the caribou? Why are they letting the country burn up and all of these animals are suffering? How are people allowing this to happen, right? Why are all of these lives not valued, right? Where is the respect? Where is the respect for the land? Where is the respect for all of nature? And we think about, okay, that underpins things too. It underpins those animals' security, their security among the whole family of animals and plants. It underpins the plant security, it underpins the water security, it underpins the security for the fish to continue to exist as they are. It is not about us. And I hate to break it to you all, but it's not about us. It's not about human beings, okay? It never was. It's everybody's always asking the animals and the plants and the land to do more for the humans. It's done enough for you, okay? What can you do for the Arctic, right? What can you do for the animals of the Arctic? What can you do for the communities of the Arctic, not just the human communities, but also the caribou community, the caribou calving grounds, the moose, the reindeers, the fish, the water, right? All of those things, exactly like Church was talking about, they intersect with human security as well, right? And if we can communicate, and if we can cooperate with each other, and we can understand, not everybody has the same values, but we can exchange our values, eh? You don't have to just have one. You can have two at the same time, or three at the same time, and understand that these things are not binary, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a really important message. And Jackie Jacobson, I just want to get your view as well, and also something that Randy Churchkey was saying, that you have to be a good listener to be able to really improve overall security. What does good listening mean from your perspective? How important is it that Indigenous communities are involved right from the start?
I'm just speaking on the Canadian Ranger program itself. I think a Canadian Ranger program is good for Canada in regards to having meaningful, respectful, and working environment in the local community, because we are the community. The Rangers that are from that patrol group, so they're either workers, politicians, sitting mayor, different aspects of the government, but we're all volunteers, and we all, for myself, I'm a politician for 12 years for the Legislative Assembly for the Northwest Territories, so I'm a really good listener. So, in regards to working with our home communities and respectful, and try to do the best for the community as a whole, that's the way to go and work together. And not only for my home community, but right across the territory, because when you see our red sweaters across, it's just like your brother and your sister. You got automatic trust in regards to working together, and same like, working with our local community.
Thank you. And Jomo, so obviously we have, we've got the Rangers being the eyes and ears. We have increase in overall kind of security threat in terms of the military presence increasing. What specific measures are you taking kind of citywide to counter threats? And do you see new threats appearing on the horizon?
Well, I want to get right to the point, to the Achilles heel. All the threats can be looked on from the three different points of view. Security of supply. 90% of any foreign trade in Finland is done by sea. Same goes for Baltic countries, I think Sweden. And you don't have to be the military expert to see that the Baltic Sea is very easy. it doesn't need to necessarily be a situation of warfare. It can be a nuisance, just making trouble, like GPS distractions for the air traffic and vessels on the sea, which is proven to be the fact. Finland becomes an isolated island overnight. We need to have an alternative route to North Atlantic. Road, rail, critical infrastructure. And this is mainly the reason why our delegation is here. This is something not new to us. We've been lobbying it for decades, and now it's time to stop lobbying and doing something, because the economy, we had a tremendous lady here yesterday, the mayor of Luleå, which is now appointed the Prime Minister of Norway.
Camilla, yes.
Yeah, last night at the dinner table we did this. The Chamber of Commerce in Lapland has come up with the staggering number of 187 billion of invests on a table in Finland, Sweden, and Arctic Norway. But if we are an island, this all goes down the drain.
So are you very concerned? I mean, this is a question that's come through. Do we have the necessary land-based infrastructure in the High North? And this is to support NATO needs in a crisis, but you just also concerned about the kind of general future economic security, about not having that infrastructure.
It all comes down to the logistics as far as the biggest threat is concerned.
And what steps should be taken to address this? What do you want to see on a national level, and what can you do on a city level to progress that?
I'm trying to change your mind and share my opinion. That's my share of the thing. But preparedness, the bad news is it doesn't happen overnight. We've been practicing it for decades. And as far as this alternative route to North Atlantic is concerned, we need to start cross-border cooperation. It certainly will be a governmental issue and a national budget issue. It will be so expensive, and but the work has to be start now.
Okay, Anja, let me bring you in.
Yeah, about the cooperation between East-West. Our project also aiming that the initiative that we've taken with competence raising and knowledge raising for the companies, that also should be spread in the northern part of Norway, so the 3 counties in the north, Norway, and also across northern Finland and Sweden. And that is also where we need to also secure the financials for that initiative. We also ask that the departments of defense in the countries also take charge and take action in that, also to take responsibility in using local companies.
Mm-hmm. But have there been opportunities, though, in this new kind of security environment? Which innovations are you seeing springing up in your region?
It's cruel to say that the history has proven that the crisis, and especially war, is a very fruitful time for the new innovations. It's harsh to say, but this is what happens. And just to give you the example, Oulu has been a world leader in 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G radio technology, and now the world leader in 6G. And now, what does these young fellows in the garage do? They turn their clock back to the 60s. What is there for the radio technology? There's an ancient system of HF, high-frequency technology. And they formed a company called KNL. And the product is, I'm not an expert. I tried to ask them that, could you please tell me in detail how does it done? But they can create a HF network, not kilometers, not 100 kilometers, but 1,000 kilometers. This is totally instructable. The demand is immense. They now employ 250 people. The bottleneck is the production, but you cannot give it to the Chinese to produce. And I was asking, how does the technology work? They said, well, we go to the atmosphere and we have to use the magnetism of the Earth. And I said, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Innovations, yes.
Yes.
Good news.
So certainly there is a room for innovation, and also potentially innovations that take into account the unique Arctic operating environment as well. What is your take on that? I mean, of course, NATO expansion in the Arctic is hugely significant, but we do need to understand that the Arctic is a unique operating environment, and so obviously any kind of potential economic developments has to take that into account as well.
I'll try to be brief, because the answer to that question could take several hours, but we don't have but a few moments. I think to start off with, though, I'd like to make just a brief announcement saying the Stevens Center is about 40-some people located in Anchorage, Alaska, and we're just thrilled beyond measure that Finland is number 31, and Sweden is hopefully very soon number 32 in the NATO alliance. Hockey is a big thing across the high latitudes. So we're going to get, I'm going to personally pay for out of my own wallet, hockey jerseys, white on the front with blue letters, say number 31, and the back will be blue with gold letters saying number 32, the Swedish flag and a Finnish flag on both the other sleeves. So we'll just start with that. We'll take a picture, we'll post it, Arctic Frontiers. Anna, you can make that move forward. Okay, enough of the public service announcements. The answer to your very thoughtful question, I think, is you have to, when you look at the Arctic from an operator standpoint, and Admiral Moore hit this a bit earlier, it is a very challenging operating environment when you think about the aspect from platforms in the air and platforms on the sea. What's made for the lower latitudes has to be adapted to be effective in the higher latitudes. The aspects of cold and ice, dark, weather, just flying into Tromsø is an adventure. It's not necessarily made for the constitution of lower latitude aircrew. To come up here, you actually have to not only have platforms that are suited, but you also got to take time to prepare people. And some of the best ways to prepare people is to spend time with folks like the Canadian Rangers, getting out in the environment where you see that the geophysical aspects of the Arctic, even though it's warming, it is still pretty darn difficult. And as always, every 6 months, dark. So you are preparing yourself by adapting platforms and technologies, taking the time to innovate, taking the time to experiment before you commit large resources so that what you tailor and make is actually suited for purpose for the region. When we look at today, that we are seeing a lot of innovations taking place in modern technologies. Sir, you were just giving some great examples of that. Sometimes some really great examples of the past that worked really well, but been put away to the dustbin of history. Sometimes it's a good idea to open up that locker and see, would this apply today? What can we do today to infuse modern technology with old capabilities and get something from it? When we look at integrated deterrence, this is about creating platforms, forces, and capabilities to deter and dissuade. But the best way to deter and dissuade is to do something that's adapted and affordable, leveraging people as well as technologies, and having the courage to experiment and to innovate. And then ultimately using that in a comprehensive way to adapt it for the region. So again, a lot of planning discussions here, but at the end of the day, it does get down to the fact that you've got to have capabilities and you also have logistics. If you don't have logistics, capabilities don't really mean that much.
And you say you need to have logistics, but building of infrastructure may get rushed. Will it take into account the environment? That's one of the questions put through it.
You have to. Thawing permafrost is a big deal. Now, if you take a look and use lower latitude construction, for example, and permafrost is not stable and it's thawing, you're going to waste a lot of money and it's still going to be broken. So what are you using modern technologies that haven't really been thought through, for example, in construction? If I can use technologies that are accounting for the degradation of permafrost, especially in North America, we have a lot of continuous and discontinuous permafrost. As the discontinuous permafrost moves north, you better take time to see if I can use a more affordable technology, because old generation construction is just not going to work, and we're going to build a lot of broken things as a result.
Absolutely. And do you have concern that the increased accessibility of the Arctic could actually spark future conflict?
That's a great question. I paused for a moment to think about the fact that the access barriers, as noted earlier, are reducing. There's a smaller cryosphere. Access is easier not only for nations, but also for industries. Historically, the Arctic Basin itself has been the biggest impediment for human activities. But there is an awful lot of mineral resources. There is increasing fish stocks. There is increasing interest, even from the eco-tourist standpoint. So as a result, from the whole comprehensive security equation, people coming north because they see an opportunity to leverage the resources, to see the place, to connect with the community, bring with it inherent risks on this, just on the traditional law enforcement security side. But also look at it from the standpoint of nation states. Nation states, of course, not only are the Arctic nations themselves, but nations from outside the region that may see opportunity, especially when you think about the Central Arctic Basin. We reduce the effect, I think, of potential conflict, if you will, or contest, by taking a look at those that the Arctic nations themselves are all making pretty substantial land claims under the United Nations Convention on Law on the Sea. The extended continental shelves are now being largely claimed, so there's less, quote, international open space up for grabs. But that all creates tension. And so it's incumbent upon forums such as the Arctic Council to find ways to mitigate those tensions that are consistent with the nation states that are part of their respective national and really allied interests.
Let me bring you back in, Edward, and a statement from the floor. Edward Alexander, thank you for that speech earlier, so I just wanted to put that across. But I just want to get your final thoughts, really, on the implications for the Gwich'in community if there is increased access to the Arctic.
You know, it's an interesting question, and it's something that we've dealt with kind of over these last 100 years, right? So from the gold rush on. And so we've had a lot of people coming to our area for different ways of life, or mining, or hard security issues. And you think about it now with this kind of build-up in Russia, the build-up in the United States and Canada in the north, and you know, the increasing military activity. I think that there's concern, right? There's concern about keeping the region a peaceful region. There's concern for making sure that missteps don't occur between our communities and various militaries around the world. You know, we saw, you know, those types of things occur during the last build-up, the distant early warning sites, White Alice sites, those kinds of impacts that they had on our communities. And so communication is the key, right? Which want to talk to people. We want to have people come and talk to us. We want to have partnerships, but we also want to make sure that there isn't undue impacts on our communities.
Absolutely. Okay, well, many thanks. That is all we have time for. There's a really packed program as well for the rest of the day. So I'd like to give a really warm welcome to the panel because it's really been fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting.
Indeed, thank you very much to all the panelists. A very important discussion on the practical steps that need to be taken to ensure local resilience and local security, but also some rather philosophical questions were raised. So thank you, Edward, for it. Reminded me a bit of former President Jack Kennedy, who said, you know, ask not what you can do for the Arctic, but ask what the Arctic can do for you. A bit similar, I guess, no? The other philosophical point raised was really be a good listener, so I hope you listen for me for another 30 seconds. We'll take a 30 minutes break now, then we have 3 more side events. One, for example, on human and environmental security, but discussed from an indigenous women perspective, so I hope you join that one or the other one. Half an hour break afterwards, and then the last big picture on Arctic artificial intelligence. So enjoy the break and side events, and see you soonish. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, that was great. Thank you, thank you.
To me, coexistence is the defining challenge in the Arctic today, be it the coexistence of states in an era defined by geostrategic competition, the coexistence of an already fragile Arctic ecosystem with emerging economic opportunity, or the coexistence of Arctic communities and their ways of life in a rapidly changing Arctic. Diplomacy and the pursuit of coexistence go hand in hand, so yes, I have a role in ensuring coexistence. It's to enable cooperation rather than conflict, and shared prosperity rather than exploitation.
To me, coexistence means that multiple groups share the same resource, like for example the Arctic and its ecosystem. This coexistence requires that all those groups cooperate in order to optimally use, but also to protect this resource. Yes, in my life I have a small role in ensuring the coexistence inside the Arctic, as my research aims to reduce the footprint that scientific and also commercial operations have on the Arctic and its ecosystem.
Hi, my name is Oda and I'm from Tromsø. Coexistency for me is about being able to use the resources that is in the ocean without compromising the marine ecosystems. This is especially important to me because I want my son to be able to experience the ocean as I did. And in my job, I look at environmental pollutions around fish farms, and in that way I have a role in ensuring the coexistency. Looking forward to hear from you.
De er postfeil. Mikkel.
Den ideale nordlendingen, jeg føler liksom ikke helt at jeg stemmer med det. For det er ikke sånn hår på skuldrene og et fest.
Det har vært veldig trendy å si ja, vi hører på dere, kjempefint med ungdom, men så har de liksom ikke gjort noe. Det er ungdommen som legger
Ja, hvis du prater med Ja, begge to hører jeg nå. Og så setter jeg meg selv i solo, da hører jeg ikke det. Nei.
Om 5 år, jeg vet ikke, det viktigste er jo fremtiden utdanning. Det blir jævla
I think it might be stuck, like, somewhere between here and there. So, let me just try and take this whole thing through. It's not going to be easy. Yeah, it's always, these are very convenient, but also a big hassle.